The ice storm hit Kepler 442b like the fist of an angry god. Zara pressed her back against the metal wall of the mining shaft, her forearms wrapped protectively around her daughter's trembling form. Nira's scales had turned the pale blue of fear, and her large golden eyes darted between the entrance and the deepening shadows of the tunnel. At only 6 cycles old, she had never experienced a storm this violent. "Mama," Nira whispered in their native tongue, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Are we going to die?" Zara's primary arms tightened around her child, while her secondary hands checked the small energy blade at her belt. In Veltar society, such a question would normally earn a sharp rebuke. Fear was weakness. Weakness meant death. But here, alone in the darkness with ice crystals forming on the tunnel walls, Zara found herself whispering back, "No, little star. We survive. We always survive." It was the motto of their people. The Veltar had clawed their way from the bottom of their world's food chain through sheer ruthlessness. They showed no mercy because they had never been shown any. They took what they needed because asking meant vulnerability. They trusted no one because trust was a luxury their ancestors could never afford. The mining colony of New Velcander reflected these harsh truths. Built into the frozen mountains of this distant world, it existed for one purpose: extracting the rare crystalline formations that powered their ships. The work was brutal, the conditions deadly, and the social structure unforgiving. Only the strong survived. Only the ruthless prospered. Zara had learned these lessons well. She had fought her way up from the deepest mines to become a tunnel supervisor, earning respect through violence and fear. Her claws bore the scars of dozens of challenges. Her reputation kept the other workers in line. She had built a life of careful isolation, trusting no one, depending on nothing but her own strength. But everything changed when Nira was born. The moment Zara held her daughter for the first time, something cracked in the armor around her heart. The tiny creature's complete helplessness, her absolute dependence, awakened something Zara had thought dead. For the first time in her adult life, she cared about something more than her own survival. She had tried to suppress it. She trained Nira to be hard, to be strong, to show no weakness. But late at night, when no one could see, she would hold her daughter close and sing the old lullabies her own mother had sung before the authorities took her away for showing inappropriate attachment. Now, as the storm raged outside with unprecedented fury, Zara faced her worst nightmare. The emergency shelters were 3 kilometers away through the worst weather Kepler 442b had seen in decades. The temperature was dropping past the point where even Veltar physiology could compensate. And Nira, despite her brave words, was already showing signs of hypothermic shock. The choice was simple and terrible. Zara could make it to the shelters alone. She was strong enough, fast enough, ruthless enough. But carrying Nira would slow her down, drain her energy, make survival uncertain for both of them. Every instinct screamed at her to leave the child. It was the rational choice, the Veltar choice. Save herself, preserve her genetic line through future offspring, live to fight another day. Nira was weak anyway, always had been. The pale scaling, the oversized eyes, the gentle temperament that refused to harden no matter how much Zara pushed. Better to let nature take its course. The wind screamed through the tunnel entrance, carrying ice crystals that cut like tiny knives. Zara's breath came in visible puffs as the temperature continued to plummet. In another hour, maybe less, this shelter would become a tomb. She looked down at Nira, who had stopped shivering. That was bad. When Veltar stopped shivering, it meant their bodies were shutting down non-essential functions, preparing for death. "Mama," Nira whispered, her voice dreamy and distant. "I'm not cold anymore." Zara's heart hammered in her chest. She had perhaps 30 minutes before the hypothermia became irreversible. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The rational choice remained unchanged. Save yourself. Survive. That's what any Veltar would do. Instead, Zara gathered her daughter closer and prepared to venture into the storm. She would carry Nira or die trying. In that moment, she didn't care if it made her weak. She didn't care if it went against every principle of her species. Some things were worth dying for. The ice storm waited outside like a hungry beast, and Zara stepped into its maw. The cold hit them like a physical blow the moment they left the tunnel. Zara had wrapped Nira in every spare piece of clothing they had, but the wind cut through the fabric like it wasn't there. Her daughter's weight seemed to double with each step as exhaustion and hypothermia sapped Zara's strength. The familiar landmarks of the mining colony had vanished behind walls of swirling snow and ice. She had been walking for what felt like hours but couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Her secondary arms ached from supporting Nira's limp form while her primaries broke trail through the deepening drifts. Ice crystals formed on her breathing slits, making each breath a struggle. Left? No, right? She gasped, trying to remember the route to the emergency shelters. But everything looked the same in the whiteout conditions. The storm had erased the world, leaving only cold and wind and the growing certainty that she had made a fatal mistake. A Veltar warrior would have left the child. A Veltar survivor would have reached safety by now, warm and alive while the weak perished in the storm. But Zara couldn't release her grip on her daughter, couldn't abandon the small life that had become more precious to her than her own. Mama. Nira's voice was barely a whisper. I can't feel my hands. Panic shot through Zara's system. She pressed her daughter closer, trying to share what little body heat remained. But she could feel her own strength failing. Her legs shook with each step. Her vision blurred from exhaustion and cold. They weren't going to make it. The realization hit her with startling clarity. She had doomed them both with her weakness, her inability to make the hard choice. In trying to save Nira, she had killed them both. It was exactly the kind of emotional thinking that Veltar society had evolved to suppress. Zara stumbled and fell, her knees hitting the frozen ground hard enough to send shock waves through her system. For a moment, she couldn't find the strength to rise. The snow felt almost warm against her face, inviting her to rest, to sleep, to let the cold take them both. No, she snarled, the word torn away by the wind. She struggled back to her feet, lifting Nira's increasingly limp form. We don't give up. We survive. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. They had perhaps minutes left before the cold claimed them. Her hearts were slowing, her thoughts becoming sluggish. This was how it ended. Not in glorious battle or noble sacrifice, but lost and alone in an uncaring storm. That's when she saw the light. At first, she thought it was hallucination, her mind conjuring false hope in its final moments. But the warm yellow glow remained steady through the swirling snow, growing brighter as she forced herself toward it. A figure emerged from the storm, moving with impossible steadiness through the wind and ice. Tall and bipedal, wrapped in thermal gear that seemed far more advanced than anything the colony possessed. Human. Zara had encountered humans before, of course. They were common throughout this sector of space, often working alongside other species in mining operations. But she had never paid them much attention. They seemed weak to her, with their soft skin and gentle mannerisms. Too trusting, too emotional. Everything Veltar society had taught her to despise. The human approached without hesitation, his light cutting through the storm like a beacon. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly despite the wind, filtered through a universal translator. Are you hurt? Do you need help? The question stunned Zara more than the cold ever could. Help? From a stranger? In Veltar society, such an offer would be a trap, a sign of weakness to be exploited. She clutched Nira tighter, her survival instincts screaming warnings. But the human didn't attack, didn't demand payment or service in exchange. He simply waited, his light steady and warm, while Zara's mind struggled to process this impossible scenario. Your child is in hypothermic shock, the human said, and somehow his words carried no judgment, only concern. I have emergency medical supplies. A heated shelter is 300 meters that way. He pointed into the storm with absolute confidence, as if he could see through the chaos that had blinded her. Still Zara hesitated. Every instinct told her this was wrong, dangerous, weak. But Nira's breathing had become so shallow Zara could barely detect it. Her daughter's scales had gone completely white, the color of approaching death. Please, Zara whispered, the word alien on her tongue. She had never asked for help before, had never shown vulnerability to a stranger. But her daughter was dying, and nothing else mattered. The human stepped forward without hesitation. "My name is David Chen," the human said as he wrapped an emergency thermal blanket around Nira's still form. "I'm a geologist with the survey team. We need to get her warm immediately." Zara watched in stunned silence as David worked with practiced efficiency. His movements were gentle but sure as he checked Nira's pulse and breathing. When he looked up at Zara, his eyes held something she had never seen before in an adult's gaze. Kindness without calculation. Concern without agenda. "Can you walk?" he asked. "My shelter has full life support and medical equipment." "Why?" The word escaped Zara's throat like a croak. "Why help us?" David's expression showed genuine confusion. "Because you need help. Because your daughter is dying." It wasn't an answer that made sense in Zara's world. Veltar didn't help strangers. They formed alliances based on mutual benefit, temporary partnerships that lasted only as long as both parties gained advantage. But pure altruism? Helping someone with no expectation of return? It was inconceivable. Yet here was this human, risking his own safety in the storm to aid two aliens he had never met. More than that, he seemed to find her question strange, as if helping others was the most natural thing in the universe. "Come on," David said, lifting Nira with surprising strength. "Stay close to me. The shelter's not far." Zara followed in a daze, her mind reeling from exhaustion and confusion. David moved through the storm like he had mapped every snowdrift personally. His equipment was indeed superior to anything the mining colony possessed. The light he carried cut through the wind-driven snow with laser precision. His suit seemed to generate its own heat field, but it was more than superior technology. There was something in the way he carried himself, the way he had immediately taken charge of their survival without hesitation or doubt. Not the aggressive dominance she was accustomed to from Veltar leaders, but something else. A quiet confidence born from genuine competence rather than intimidation. "Here we are," David announced, and suddenly a structure materialized out of the storm. It was beautiful. That was Zara's first thought, and it shocked her. Veltar didn't build beautiful things. They built functional things, efficient things, intimidating things. But David's shelter was a work of art. Curved walls that shed wind and snow naturally. A soft blue glow that seemed to invite rather than command. Emergency gear arranged with almost aesthetic precision. Inside, the contrast was even more striking. Warm air enveloped them immediately. Soft music played from hidden speakers. The walls displayed slowly shifting patterns of earth forests and ocean waves. It was a place designed not just for survival but for comfort, for healing. "Set her here," David said, indicating a medical alcove that had already begun warming to optimal temperature. "The diagnostic systems will take over." Zara hesitated for a moment before releasing her daughter. Letting go felt like tearing away part of her soul. But Nira needed care she couldn't provide, and this strange human seemed to know exactly what to do. David worked quickly, connecting monitoring leads and adjusting environmental controls. "She's stable," he announced after a few tense minutes. "Body temperature is rising. No signs of permanent damage. She's going to be fine." Relief hit Zara like a physical blow. Her legs gave out and she collapsed into a chair, her arms shaking uncontrollably. For the first time in her adult life, she wept. Not the quiet tears of hidden grief, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the center of her being. David said nothing, but she felt a gentle weight on her shoulder. His hand, offering comfort without words. It should have felt threatening, invasive. Instead, it was the most reassuring touch she had ever experienced. "I don't understand," she managed between sobs. "Why save us? We're nothing to you. Strangers. Aliens." David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "On Earth, we have a saying. I am because we are. No one survives alone. No one succeeds without help. Your strength becomes my strength. Your survival becomes my survival." Zara looked up at him through tear-blurred vision. "That's impossible." The strong survive by taking from the weak. It's the natural order. Maybe for some species, David acknowledged. But humans learned something different. We learned that our greatest strength comes from our ability to care for each other, to sacrifice for strangers, to choose compassion even when it costs us. He gestured toward Nira, who was already showing better color as the medical systems worked. Your love for your daughter isn't weakness. It's the strongest force in the universe. It made you run into a killing storm. It made you risk everything for someone else's survival. But you could have died, Zara whispered. Saving us could have killed you. David smiled, and in that expression Zara saw something that transformed her understanding of existence itself. Some things are worth dying for, he said simply. But more importantly, they're worth living for. The storm raged for 3 days. During that time, Zara watched David Chun with the intensity of a scientist studying a new species. Everything about him challenged her fundamental understanding of survival, strength, and what it meant to be alive. He shared his food without rationing. When Zara protested that they were depleting his supplies, he laughed and showed her the shelter's recycling systems. Abundance shared is abundance multiplied, he said, and somehow made it sound like simple truth rather than naive philosophy. He treated Nira not as a burden or weakness, but as a treasure to be protected. He told her stories from Earth about brave explorers and magical creatures. He showed her pictures of human children playing in places called parks and beaches. He drew pictures with her when she grew restless, and never once displayed impatience or irritation. Most shocking of all, he spoke to Zara as an equal, not as a rival to be defeated or a resource to be exploited, but as another person worthy of respect and consideration. He asked about Veltar culture with genuine curiosity, listened to her explanations without judgment, and shared his own experiences with open honesty. You said your people learned to be hard because your world was hard, David observed on the second day. They were sitting near the shelters viewing port, watching the storm paint abstract patterns in the ice-covered landscape. Nira slept peacefully in the medical alcove, her color fully returned to healthy green. The weak died, Zara confirmed. Only the strong survived to breed. Over generations we became what we are. And what are you? David asked gently. The question caught Zara off guard. She had always known the answer. Veltar were warriors, predators, survivors who took what they needed and destroyed what threatened them. But watching David's kindness over the past days, seeing her daughter laugh and play without fear, she found herself questioning everything. I don't know anymore, she admitted. David nodded as if this was the wisest thing she could have said. Humans went through something similar. For thousands of years we were tribal, violent. We fought wars over territory, resources, beliefs. We convinced ourselves that cruelty was strength and that caring was weakness. What changed? We realized we were wrong. David's voice carried quiet conviction. Real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about lifting them up. True survival isn't just about keeping yourself alive. It's about creating a world where everyone can thrive. Zara studied his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden agenda. But David's expression remained open, honest, almost radiant with belief in what he was saying. That's impossible, she said, but the words lacked her usual certainty. If everyone is soft, who protects against those who aren't? We protect each other, David replied. A society built on compassion isn't weak. It's incredibly strong because everyone is invested in its survival. When people know they'll be cared for, they care in return. When they feel safe, they can be brave. When they experience kindness, they become kind. And if they don't? If someone chooses cruelty despite your kindness? David's expression grew serious. Then we stop them. But we do it out of love for those they would hurt, not hatred for them. We understand that cruelty comes from pain, and pain can be healed. Zara felt something shifting deep in her chest, like ice beginning to crack under spring warmth. Your species must be very different from mine. Maybe, David acknowledged, or maybe we just chose a different path. Evolution isn't just about survival of the fittest. It's about adaptation to environment. And sometimes the environment rewards cooperation more than competition. That night, Zara dreamed of her own childhood. She remembered her mother's gentle touch, quickly hidden when others approached. She remembered the lullabies, sung in whispers. She remembered feeling safe and loved for a brief, precious time before the authorities declared such emotions inappropriate and removed her mother for rehabilitation. She woke to find David sitting vigil beside the medical alcove, monitoring Nira's vital signs even though the automated systems made his presence unnecessary. He had been doing this every night, she realized. Standing guard not because he suspected threat, but because he cared. "David," she whispered. He turned, alert immediately. "Is everything all right? My mother used to sing to me," Zara said, the words coming from some deep, hidden place. "Before they took her away, she said I was her star, her reason for living. I thought that made her weak." David's expression softened with understanding. "What do you think now?" Zara looked at her sleeping daughter, at this human who had risked everything for strangers, at the shelter that had become a sanctuary of warmth and safety in the hostile storm. "I think," she said slowly, "that maybe I've been wrong about everything." On the fourth morning, the storm finally broke. Zara woke to sunlight streaming through the shelter's transparent walls, painting everything in gold and crystal. The world outside had been transformed into something magical. Ice formations caught and scattered light like prisms. The mining colony's harsh industrial lines were softened by curves of snow and frost. "Beautiful, isn't it?" David said. He was preparing breakfast with the same careful attention he gave everything. "Storms destroy, but they also create." Nira pressed her face to the viewing port, golden eyes wide with wonder. "Mama, look, it's like the stories grandfather used to tell about the crystal caves." Zara joined her daughter, remembering those forbidden tales her own father had whispered in secret. Stories of beauty and magic that had no place in practical Veltar society. She had thought them foolish then. Now, looking at the transformed landscape, she wondered what other wisdom she had dismissed. "We should return to the colony," she said, though the words felt hollow. The thought of going back to the harsh routines, the constant vigilance, the carefully maintained isolation, filled her with unexpected dread. "Of course," David agreed. "But first, let me show you something." He led them outside, where the air was crisp and clean. The storm had passed completely, leaving brilliant blue sky overhead. David pointed to a ridge about a kilometer away, where Zara could see movement. "Rescue teams," he explained. "They've been searching for survivors since the storm ended. That's your people coming to find you." Zara felt a complex mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that help was coming, that they would be safe, but also fear about explaining where they had been, who had helped them, and why she had made the choices she did. "Will you tell them about me?" David asked quietly. The question surprised her. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because," David said with gentle understanding, "it might be dangerous for you. A Veltar who accepted help from a human, who showed weakness by crying, who chose emotion over logic. Your society might not understand." Zara stared at him, realizing with sudden clarity that he was right. The other supervisors would see her actions as proof of unfitness for leadership. The workers would lose respect for her. The authorities might decide she needed the same rehabilitation her mother had received. But as she looked at Nira, healthy and alive and laughing as she chased ice crystals in the wind, Zara found herself making another choice that would have been impossible just days before. "Let them come," she said. "Let them see." The rescue team arrived within the hour. 6 Veltar in environmental suits, led by Kral, her immediate supervisor. Their approach was efficient and professional, showing no emotion at finding survivors. "Zara," Kral's voice crackled through the comm system. "Report your status." "Alive," Zara replied. "Both of us. Uninjured. How did you survive the storm? This area should have been uninhabitable." Zara took a deep breath, feeling David's presence beside her like an anchor of strength. "We had help." She gestured to David, who stepped forward with calm dignity. The rescue team's weapons trained on him instantly, but he showed no fear. "This is David Chun," Zara continued. "He saved our lives. He provided shelter, medical care, food, and protection. He asked for nothing in return." The silence stretched for long seconds. Zara could see the confusion and suspicion in her people's postures. This didn't fit their understanding of how the universe worked. "You accepted aid from an alien?" Kral's voice carried disbelief and disapproval. "You showed weakness to a stranger?" "I showed gratitude to a friend," Zara replied, "and meant it completely." "Impossible. Humans don't help without agenda. What does he want? What did you promise him?" Zara looked at David, who smiled encouragingly. "Nothing," she said. "He wanted nothing. He helped because helping was right." The rescue team exchanged glances. Several raised their weapons higher, clearly viewing David as a threat despite his obvious peacekeeping posture. "Step away from the human," Kral ordered. "We'll handle this from here." But Zara didn't move. Instead, she placed herself between David and the weapons, her forearms spread wide in protection. "No," she said clearly. "This man saved my daughter's life. He risked his own safety for strangers. He showed us kindness when we needed it most. I will not let you harm him." "You're compromised," Kral declared. "The human has manipulated you, made you weak." Zara felt something crystallize in her chest, hard and clear as the ice formations around them. "No," she said. "He made me strong." The confrontation stretched taut as wire in the crystalline morning air. 6 Veltar weapons remained trained on David, who stood with remarkable calm beside the shelter that had saved their lives. Zara felt her daughter press close behind her, small hands gripping her thermal suit. The rescue team's confusion was palpable. They had come expecting to find survivors, not this impossible scene of cross-species cooperation. "Zara," Kral's voice carried the authority of years in command. "Stand down. Return to formation. We're leaving." "Not without David," Zara replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her twin hearts. "The human is not our concern. He is mine." The words hung in the air like a challenge. In Veltar society, such defiance would normally be met with immediate violence. Kral's weapon shifted toward Zara herself, and she saw the exact moment when he made the calculation. Better to lose one compromised supervisor than let weakness spread through the ranks. But before anyone could act, Nira stepped out from behind her mother. "Please don't hurt Uncle David," she said in clear, precise Veltar. Her golden eyes met each weapon in turn without flinching. "He told me stories. He made me better when I was sick. He's good." The simple honesty in her voice seemed to cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Several weapons wavered. Even hardened Veltar miners understood the protective instincts surrounding young ones. "The child has been contaminated," Kral declared, but his certainty had cracked slightly. "Human emotional manipulation tactics." "What tactics?" Zara demanded. "Saving our lives? Sharing his food? Keeping watch while we slept? If that's manipulation, then I want to be manipulated." "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have." Zara took a step forward, placing herself even more directly in the line of fire. "For the first time in my life, I've seen what strength really looks like. Not the strength to dominate or destroy, but the strength to protect and nurture and sacrifice for others." Behind the rescue team, she could see more figures approaching. Colony administrators, other supervisors, even some of the miners she had managed. Word was spreading. Soon there would be a crowd, and the situation would become even more volatile. David must have seen it too, because he stepped forward with his hands clearly visible and empty. "I should go," he said quietly. "I don't want to cause trouble for your family." "No," Zara said immediately. "You're not going anywhere alone." She turned to face the approaching crowd, her voice carrying across the ice with surprising authority. "This human saved my daughter's life. He risked everything to help strangers. He showed us kindness without agenda, compassion without condition. He is worth 10 of us." Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. Zara could see shock, confusion, and something else. Something that looked almost like longing. "I know what you're thinking," she continued. "That I've gone soft. That exposure to human emotion has made me weak. But I tell you, this human is stronger than any Veltar I've ever known. Not because he can fight, but because he chooses not to. Not because he can take what he wants, but because he gives what others need." "Impossible," someone called from the crowd. "Humans are weak, emotional, prey species." "Then explain this," Zara challenged. She gestured to the shelter behind them, to the medical equipment that had saved Nira, to the 3 days of safety they had enjoyed while the storm raged. "Explain how a weak species built technology superior to ours, how they crossed the stars, how they've created a civilization that values every life." The crowd fell silent. Even Kral seemed uncertain now, his weapon lowering slightly. David stepped forward again, his voice calm and clear. "My people aren't perfect," he said through the translator. "We've made mistakes. We've been cruel and selfish and stupid. But we learned something important. We learned that the strongest societies are built on the simple idea that everyone matters. That the measure of a civilization isn't how well it treats the powerful, but how it cares for the vulnerable." He looked directly at Kral. "You came to rescue your people. That shows you understand the value of life. The question is, do you understand the value of all life?" For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was wind across ice and the distant hum of colony machinery. Then, slowly, Kral lowered his weapon completely. "What do you want from us?" he asked. David smiled, and in that expression Zara saw the same gentle strength that had sustained them through the storm. "Nothing," he said. "I want nothing from you, but I offer something to you. Friendship, partnership, the chance to build something better together. And if we refuse, then you refuse. I'll go back to my survey work. You'll return to your colony. And maybe someday, when you're ready, we'll meet again." Zara watched her people process this impossible offer. Help without strings. Friendship without dominance. Cooperation without submission. It violated everything they thought they knew about the universe. But as she looked around at the faces in the crowd, she saw something she had never noticed before. Exhaustion, loneliness, the hollow look of beings who had spent their lives fighting everyone, including themselves. "I want to learn," she said, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "I want to understand this strength he speaks of, this compassion, this way of living where everyone matters." More voices joined hers, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Miners who were tired of violence. Supervisors who questioned the old ways. Parents who wanted something better for their children. Not everyone. Many remained skeptical, suspicious, afraid. Change would be slow and difficult, but it was beginning. Zara looked at David, at her daughter, at the transformed landscape around them. The storm had passed, but it had left everything different, including them. "Thank you," she said simply. David's smile was warm as sunlight. "Thank you for letting me help." And in that moment, Zara finally understood what he had tried to tell her. The greatest strength wasn't in taking or conquering or surviving alone. It was in the courage to care, to trust, to build something beautiful together. The ice storm was over. The real journey was just beginning. The changes came slowly at first, like ice melting under gentle sun. Zara stood in what had once been Conference Room 7, now transformed into something unprecedented in Veltar society. Soft lighting replaced harsh fluorescence. Comfortable seating arrangements encouraged discussion rather than hierarchy. Most shocking of all, the walls displayed images of other worlds, other species, other ways of living. They called it the Learning Center, though some of the older supervisors still referred to it with derision as the Human Contamination Room. Zara didn't care. Every day, more Veltar came to listen, to question, to wonder if there might be another way. "Mama, look what I drew." Nira bounded into the room, her scales bright with excitement. She held up a picture that would have horrified colony authorities 3 months ago. Veltar and humans working together, building something beautiful under a star-filled sky. "It's wonderful little star," Zara said, and meant it completely. The term of endearment no longer felt dangerous. She had learned that love spoken aloud didn't diminish, it multiplied. David emerged from the small office he had been allocated, carrying data tablets and wearing the expression of someone deep in thought. His presence at the colony had caused considerable controversy initially. Many Veltar still viewed him with suspicion or outright hostility. But gradually, his quiet competence and unwavering kindness had won converts. "The mineral survey results are remarkable," he announced, setting the tablets on the central table. "The formations here are more extensive than anyone realized. But more importantly, there are artifacts." Artifacts? Zara felt her primary heart skip a beat. Veltar artifacts. Ancient ones. Your people were here before, thousands of years ago. And based on the archaeological evidence, they were different then. Kral entered at that moment, his posture still carrying military precision but his expression thoughtful rather than hostile. The transformation in the former security chief had been perhaps the most surprising of all. His warrior instincts hadn't disappeared, but they had been redirected toward protecting the vulnerable rather than enforcing hierarchy. Different how? Kral asked, studying the data displays David projected. Cooperative, collaborative. The settlement patterns, the architecture, even the burial sites suggest a society based on mutual support rather than individual dominance. David's voice carried careful neutrality, but Zara could see the excitement in his eyes. "That's impossible," Kral said automatically, then caught himself. "I mean, our histories don't record." "Official histories," Zara corrected gently. "But there are stories. Legends my grandfather used to tell about the soft times when Veltar lived in harmony. The authorities called them corrupting fantasies." "What if they weren't fantasies?" David asked. "What if your people chose hardness in response to specific environmental pressures? And what if those pressures no longer exist?" The implications hung in the air like morning mist. Everything they had been taught about Veltar nature, about the necessity of cruelty, about survival of the fittest, what if it was all just one possible path, not an inevitable destiny? "There's more," David continued. "The mineral formations here aren't just valuable for energy. They have properties that could revolutionize terraforming, agriculture, even medical treatment. But extracting them requires cooperation between species. No single civilization has the complete knowledge or technology." Zara understood immediately. "You're offering us a partnership. I'm offering you a choice. The old way, extraction, depletion, moving on when resources run out. Or something new, sustainable development, shared knowledge, building something that lasts." Kral studied the projections with the intensity he had once reserved for battle plans. "The Colony Council will resist. They profit from the current system." "Some will," Zara agreed. "But others are already asking questions. The mining accident last week that killed 3 workers, it wouldn't have happened if we'd used human safety protocols. The food shortages that forced us to reduce rations, they wouldn't exist if we'd implemented the agricultural techniques David suggested." It was true. In the months since the ice storm, problems that had been accepted as inevitable were being revealed as simply unnecessary. Human approaches to medicine had reduced workplace injuries by 60%. Their conflict resolution methods had ended several territorial disputes that had festered for years. Most importantly, their emphasis on psychological well-being had led to the first measurable decrease in violence in the colony's history. "The children understand fastest," Nira piped up, and everyone turned to look at the small Veltar who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation. "At school, we draw pictures together now. We sing songs. We help each other with hard lessons. Teacher Mirak says cooperation makes everyone smarter." From the mouths of children, Zara felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. The next generation was already embracing changes that their parents struggled to accept. "There's going to be resistance," Kral warned. "Administrator Vex is organizing opposition. Claims you've been brainwashed by human psychological warfare." Zara nodded grimly. She had expected this. Change was never easy, especially change that challenged fundamental beliefs about identity and survival. Vex represented the old guard, Veltar, who saw any deviation from traditional hardness as existential threat. "What does he want?" David asked. "A formal challenge," Kral replied. "Combat trial. Winner takes control of colony policy." The words sent ice through Zara's veins. Combat trials were ancient Veltar tradition, brutal affairs that typically ended in death or permanent injury. Vex was younger than her, stronger, and had never shown a moment's mercy in his rise through the administrative ranks. "I'll fight him," she said immediately. "No." David's voice was quiet but firm. "That's the old way. That's exactly what we're trying to move beyond. But if I don't? If you don't, then we find another solution. Violence might be fast, but it's not the only answer." Kral shook his head. "You don't understand Veltar culture. Refusing the challenge would be seen as cowardice. Zara would lose all authority, and Vex would have the excuse he needs to purge anyone who's embraced human methods." David was quiet for a long moment, and Zara could almost see him thinking through possibilities, weighing options. When he spoke, his voice carried the same calm confidence that had guided them through the storm. "What if she accepts the challenge but changes the terms? The challenged party gets to set conditions," Kral confirmed slowly. "But what conditions could possibly?" "A competition instead of combat," David interrupted. "Let both approaches be tested side by side. Give Vex control of one mining sector using traditional methods. Give Zara control of another using collaborative approaches. Measure results over 3 months. Safety, efficiency, worker satisfaction, resource yield, everything." "That's not how combat trials work," Kral protested. "It's how problem-solving works," David replied. "And if Vex truly believes his way is superior, he should welcome the chance to prove it conclusively." Zara felt hope bloom in her chest. It was elegant, practical, and completely subversive of traditional Veltar thinking. Instead of might making right, let results speak for themselves. "He'll never agree to it," Kral said. "He will if we make the proposal public," Zara realized. "If the entire colony is watching, if workers get to choose which sector they want to join, he can't refuse without looking weak himself." David smiled. "And if his methods really are superior, he wins anyway. But if they're not, then everyone sees the difference," Zara finished. "Not through conquest, but through demonstration." Over the following days, word of the proposed challenge spread throughout the colony like wildfire. Workers gathered in small groups, discussing the implications in hushed voices. Some were excited by the possibility of change. Others were terrified of abandoning traditions that had kept their people alive for generations. Vex tried to refuse the modified terms, demanding traditional combat. But public pressure mounted. Workers who had heard about reduced injuries and improved conditions in Zara's experimental programs began asking uncomfortable questions. Why shouldn't competing approaches be tested? What was the administration afraid of? Finally, cornered by his own rhetoric about Veltar strength and superiority, Vex agreed to the competition. The colony was divided into 2 sectors. Vex took control of the larger, more established mining operations, confident that his greater resources would ensure victory. Zara accepted the smaller, more challenging territory, but she wasn't working alone. David's survey data revealed that her sector contained some of the richest mineral deposits on the planet, but accessing them would require innovative techniques. More importantly, it would require the kind of cooperation between different specialists that traditional Veltar hierarchy made nearly impossible. "We're going to need help," Zara told the 43 workers who had volunteered for her sector. They gathered in the learning center, a mix of young miners eager for change and older workers who had grown tired of the constant conflict and competition. "What kind of help?" asked Mirak, the teacher who had begun incorporating human educational methods into her classes. "Human help. David has contacts throughout this system. Engineers who specialize in sustainable extraction. Medical teams who can establish better safety protocols. Agricultural specialists who can help us become food independent." Murmurs rippled through the group. Even among Zara's supporters, accepting this level of alien assistance felt radical. "And in return?" asked one of the older miners. Knowledge sharing, David replied from where he sat near the back of the room. Veltar insights into mineral formation. Your understanding of environmental adaptation. Cultural exchange that benefits everyone. What if we fail? The question came from young Horek, barely past his coming-of-age trials. What if Vexway proves better? Zara looked around the room at these brave beings who had chosen hope over certainty, cooperation over competition. Then we fail together, she said simply. And we learn from the failure. And we try again differently. It was perhaps the most radical statement ever made in Veltar society. Failure as opportunity rather than shame. Learning rather than punishment. Trying again rather than being discarded. I'm in, Mirak said firmly. And I, added Krell. One by one, voices joined the chorus. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to begin. The next 3 months would tell whether compassion could compete with cruelty, whether cooperation could match domination, whether a different kind of strength could prove superior to the old ways. As the meeting disbanded and workers headed to their quarters, David found Zara standing at the Learning Center's main viewport, looking out at the stars. Thank you, she said without turning around. For what? For showing us that there's another way to be strong. David joined her at the viewport, their reflections ghost-like in the transparent aluminum. You showed yourselves that. I just provided an example. Will it work? Zara asked. This experiment of ours? I don't know, David admitted. But I know something important. Whether we succeed or fail, we'll do it as friends. And that's a kind of victory all by itself. Outside, the aurora danced across Kepler 442b's thin atmosphere, painting the sky in colors that spoke of beauty and possibility. The ice storm that had brought them together was long past, but its effects continued to ripple outward like waves in still water. Change was coming to the Veltar, one heart at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. And for the first time in her life, Zara looked toward the future not with grim determination, but with hope.